She burst through my front door again, keys clattering, and I felt the room tilt. "I can come any time I want," she said, brandishing a folded notice that looked official. My heart hammered against my ribs. This apartment was mine. The plants on the sill mine, the late-night lamp. Still, she moved through my rooms as if she had a claim. I moved forward. "You shouldn't be here," I said, keeping my voice steady. She laughed. "The building committee cleared it," she replied. For months, she'd pushed at every limit, slipping warnings under doors, threatening to block my car, even calling management with made-up complaints. I stayed composed because I had been planning, and she didn't suspect. She never imagined anyone would map her habits. The same boot prints by the back step, the predictable rattle of her keys at 7:30, the way she checked for witnesses before raising her voice. That evening, I had set a small trap, a trick small enough to be overlooked until it worked. As she reached for the handle, I held my breath. Splash! A can upended, a wash of cobalt across her blouse and the doorframe. She froze, paint beading and streaking, a harsh spotlight on her fury. "What the—" she blurted, stumbling back. I stayed calm, almost smiling because finally I had leverage. She hadn't expected a surprise or someone to have been watching. "Think that's funny?" she shouted, but panic flared behind the bravado. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Every smear, every expression, every accusation she flung, I documented. The committee couldn't undo this. Not tonight. When she stormed out, dripping blue, neighbors paused on balconies to stare. And I understood something clearly. Power didn't come from stamped envelopes or loud proclamations or her screams. It came from patience, observation, and the exact moment to make her facade fall apart. She left without grace. The next morning, she arrived flanked by a small film crew, as if auditioning for a scandal docuseries about tenant misconduct. You can't, she shouted, pointing at the cobalt stain still streaking the doorframe. I stood behind the counter, outwardly calm, though a quiet satisfaction hummed beneath my ribs. She was so easy to predict now. Her cameraman trailed me from room to room, recording everything. But I'd already prepared for this moment. Tiny lenses blinked from the porch beams, the mailbox, even the alleyway gate she loved to use. Every word, every accusation about my violations was captured in crisp detail, and tucked safely in my desk drawer were the ownership deeds, notarized and undeniable, proof stronger than any story she could spin. "You think you're smart?" she snapped, gripping the fence rail. "The board will fix this." I almost laughed. "The board doesn't own this lot." "I do," I said softly. "And they're about to learn what breaking and entering really looks like." Her face blanched, fury cutting through the pretense of control. But she didn't stop. That afternoon, she stormed into the housing office, shouting about fraud, claiming I'd vandalized my own home just to frame her. I didn't have to lift a finger. Her own hubris was dismantling her story for me. Still, I wanted a final act. That night, I left the front door slightly ajar, a decoy light glowing inside. A motion sensor and another small paint rig waited behind the threshold. When she crept back, whispering orders to her cameraman, the trap fired perfectly. This time, crimson paint exploded across her and her crew alike, the air filled with shrieks and splattering chaos. I stood a few paces away, phone in hand, documenting every second. Curtains shifted across the street as neighbors watched, recording too. For once, the so-called enforcer looked powerless, humiliated under the glare of her own spotlight. The next day, she returned, angrier than ever, parking her silver SUV directly in my driveway. A rolled notice fluttered in her hand like a weapon. "You're in violation! You'll regret this!" she barked, voice echoing down the block. I stepped onto the porch, camera ready, calm and deliberate. "Interesting," I said, unfolding my own papers. "Because right here, it says you have zero authority over this property." Her jaw clenched. The cameras were still rolling, but this time every lens belonged to someone else. His expression folded into disbelief. Not willing to yield, she produced her final card. A man in a tidy shirt with a laminated badge and a clipboard that made him look like an official. He stepped onto the gravel by the walkway with the self-importance of someone given power, and planted himself just inside the low fence. "Sir, you must comply with the city code immediately," he said, voice flat and rehearsed. I looked from him to her, then down at the stack of documents in my hand. "That identification is bogus," I replied, quiet and steady. The man's bravado flickered. His eyes kept darting back toward her for direction, and I could see the careful choreography beginning to fall apart. Then I opened my laptop and held the screen up for anyone on the porch to see. The footage rolled. The times she slipped through the side gate at dusk. The little typed notices folded and tucked under doors. The staged calls she'd made pretending to be a neighbor. Every falsehood captured in grainy, undeniable clips. The so-called officer's badge looked like a theater prop. His paperwork was thin and unconvincing. People had come to the fence murmuring, phones raised, sharing the live images. Her aura of authority started to chip away under the collective gaze. She shrieked, "You think you can ruin me? I will make you pay." But even some of her closest allies shifted their weight. Uncertain now, I stayed composed because one last humane sting remained in my plan. At the front gate, I had set a harmless but humiliating surprise, too. Small pressurized sprayers aimed near the latch, primed to burst when the gate swung the way she always did for maximum drama. When she charged the threshold in a final furious scene, the devices triggered. Bright streaks of teal and lime arced across her shoes, splattered her sleeves, and ruined the flimsy clipboard the man clutched. A shocked silence popped into laughter. Neighbors whooped while others scolded and continued filming. I stood back, phone steady in hand, recording every surprised expression and the slow collapse of her fury into embarrassment. It wasn't violence that toppled her, but exposure. Lies shone plainly to the people around us. I stepped forward and said, "I didn't fight for this land to be harassed by someone who thinks rules don't apply to them." She stood frozen, paint streaking her face, and in that suspended second, I knew the next move would finish the story. She wasn't finished. The next morning she returned, storming up the walk, breathless and furious, yammering into a phone that she'd called the sheriff, claiming vandalism and threats. A chill ran through me for a moment until the patrol car slid into sight, and I waved openly. "Nice timing," I called. "You want to see the evidence?" The patrolmen climbed from their cruiser, and I met them at the gate, with steady breath, guiding them through the timeline, the forged slips tucked under neighbors' doors, the paid actor with his fake credential, the repeated intrusions caught by lenses tucked into eaves and flower pots, while they skimmed the deed packet I offered, thumbs pausing on the embossed seal. His face went slack, her composure shredded when the deputy looked up, eyebrows arched, and said plainly, "Ma'am, this looks like serial trespass and impersonation. We'll have to investigate." She spluttered a string of threats about lawsuits and retaliation, voice wobbling, but the cluster of onlookers in the phones raised. Toward her turned her shouts into a thin, hollow sound. Someone at the curb muttered that the footage was already circulating through the neighborhood chat. The idea of a private scandal spread like a current. The lead officer leaned in and murmured to me, "That paint stunt, public exposure like that is exactly the pattern we need to document harassment." Relief loosened something in my chest. Every meticulous hinge, every sticky note of careful planning had bought us the clarity we needed. She stormed off, hurling one last promise over her shoulder, but the echoes of her name were already fraying. I closed and deadbolted the door, and my partner peered around the kitchen doorway, a mix of disbelief and pride on their face. "You did it," they said, exhaling a laugh that was half triumph. I let myself smile once, chastened and quiet. Today was about reclaiming a life someone else had tried to rewrite, through bluster and fakery. Not long after, she returned with reinforcements, a small gaggle waving board letter notices and wearing the righteous faces of the association, blocking the lane like a human barricade. I stepped out onto the porch, cool and collected, while my pulse ran a faster line behind my ribs. As she began to fulminate, I held up my tablet and asked, casual as a neighbor offering lemonade, "Want to see the morning's clips?" The murmurs turned to a hush as the screen played. Her furtive entries, the actor's nervous checks, the paint blooming exactly where I'd predicted. Gasps and a flood of camera phones followed. Indignation shifted in the crowd into incredulous laughter. Her color shifted from hot to ashen to incandescent fury as she inched forward, desperate to salvage the scene. And then the motion-triggered sprayer at the gate did its work one more time, dousing her shoes and hem in a ridiculous, dripping neon green that made the onlookers howl. Laughter exploded down the block. Phones rose like a field of black sunflowers, each lens hungry for the next frame. "I'm calling the police!" she shrieked, voice cracking. But even the people who had stood beside her minutes ago shuffled, embarrassed by the spectacle. Then the punchline, Mr. Alvarez, the retired attorney who lived 2 doors over, stepped out from the crowd with his hands folded and said, cool as a courtroom, "Ma'am, you've trespassed repeatedly. That's so-called authority. You wave around doesn't grant you license to enter private property. Leave now or we summon officers." The color drained from her face as the street hummed with phone chatter. Humiliation landed like a physical thing. Her bluster dissolved into thin, angry mutters. Where she had tried to wield fear, now an audience held her accountable. And every one of her threats had been transformed into footage the neighborhood could replay. I kept my composure, thumbs steady on record, because the story wasn't over. Not by far. That night she attempted one last furtive return, slipping through the side gate under the cloak of dusk, convinced the earlier chaos had scared me into silence. She thought she could be clever. She was wrong. I had wired every approach. Not only paint devices artfully hidden, but discrete feeds pushing live images straight to my phone. She padded up the porch, lips flattened with determination, and I watched from the dark kitchen. Breath even, heart tuned to the smallest sound. The instant her hand brushed the doorframe, a concealed can burst, a rush of indigo paint that soaked her from scalp to soul. She recoiled, feet sliding on the slick, knocking over the old iron lantern I'd set as a bait prop. It clattered and spun, a little metronome of embarrassment. Every jerk, every curse, every stunned blink was captured by the silent watchers, pixels recording judgment. Then the biggest turn. The clip auto-synced to the neighborhood alert channel. I'd configured for safety updates. Within moments, the whole pocket of houses had the scene, a single-frame truth that told 1,000 words. Replies flooded in, amused emojis, warnings to her, notes thanking me for handling it within legal bounds. Her expression shifted from furious red to stunned white. The private stunt intended to discredit me had only painted her as a caricature. It was about letting the world watch arrogance collapse under its own weight. That night, she learned the simplest truth. Entitlement can't outmaneuver patience, preparation, and a sharp mind. By sunrise, the news had already traveled. She marched into the community board office in stained clothes, pretending nothing was wrong, but her stride faltered the moment whispers rippled across the room. The staff had seen the clips. The fake inspector, the trespassing, the paint debacles replayed a dozen times in private group chats. She slammed a folder onto the counter. "You don't get it! He's dangerous," she barked, but the clerks merely exchanged weary looks. The paperwork in my possession was irrefutable. The digital evidence impossible to deny. One of them finally said, measured and quiet, "Ma'am, continuing this could expose you to legal charges." Her jaw opened. Shut, opened again, like a door losing its hinges. No one rose to defend her. That afternoon, I uploaded the full footage online, cleanly edited, every escalation framed by her own words, every calm response by mine. Within hours, the internet caught fire. Comments poured in from locals and strangers alike. Laughter, disbelief, reminders that power isn't ownership. I stood on my porch as she emerged from the office alone. Her once white shoes stained navy, her jacket streaked green, a living emblem of the fallout she had built for herself. The sight wasn't triumph, it was closure. She had wanted control, authority, domination. What she achieved was exposure. Behind me, my family moved easily through the rooms, unafraid again. Our home finally felt ours, unchallenged and unshaken. Justice had required no shouting. No aggression, only patience and truth given time to surface. Days passed. The air in the neighborhood lightened. Conversations drifted without tension. The board members now read every rule twice before quoting it. The gate and its flecks of color remained as quiet trophies, small reminders of resolve and restraint. My partner joined me on the porch one cool evening, her smile calm and certain. "You handled it," she said softly. "And you did it by the book." I nodded, a weight lifting from my chest. It had never been about traps or public embarrassment. It had been about drawing a line, proving that persistence and precision outlast the loudest kind of power. The stains on the wood gleamed faintly in the fading light, symbols not of battle but of balance restored. It had always been about more than traps or footage. It was about defending what belonged to us, making sure our home stayed ours and my family never felt afraid again. Every precaution, every bit of strategy, every tiny detail I'd arranged had led to this. Then the unexpected coda arrived. A local news station aired the story, dubbing it the Neighborhood Showdown. Clips of her midnight visits, her forged notices, the paint-splattered finale, all neatly edited, all verified, ran on the evening broadcast. The board stumbled to issue a statement. She disappeared from sight for a while, mortified by her own performance now looping on television and online feeds. I found myself an unwilling symbol, the quiet neighbor, who won with foresight instead of fury, patience instead of payback. I caught myself smiling at the thought of that ridiculous scene. Her flailing under the blue spray, the officer scrambling, the neighbor's laughter echoing like applause for common sense. I didn't fight for this place to let anyone trample it, I murmured into the soft evening air. And if a little color helped make the point, so be it. The sun slipped low behind the ridge, painting everything gold and calm. The fences stood unbothered, the house secure, the silence easy. For the first time in months, the land felt wholly ours, earned, guarded, and respected. Somewhere beyond those fields, she was surely replaying every mistake, each one brighter and messier than the last, learning a lesson that needed no words. Some walls you can't force open, and some people you can't intimidate.